to begin this lecture on Siqueiros with this very powerful mural. Did it in 1952. And I wanted immediately to give you the essence of the man. Here's an artist that believed in the future, but also in the past. Nowadays, we look at a lot of artists that seem to ignore the great contributions of the Renaissance, the rules of perspective, the good drawing, the chiaroscuro, people that paint like if nothing had existed before them. And then we have others who only paint as if they still lived in the 19th century. Siqueiros uses the technique of the past not to stay there, but to move forward to the future. He uses the laws of perspective to create paintings that appear to move in front of our eyes. He creates murals outdoors that can be seen from miles away. He incorporates photography and the use of new materials. He uses car paint to do murals and the spray gun to apply it and to be able to do murals in very short periods of time in large cement outdoor structures. This is a mural that he did in 1952, and it's called Hombre amo y no esclavo de la técnica. Man that is the owner, not the slave of technology. And you see to your right, kind of the old machinery, and then a person that transforms that into order and beauty. In other words, this transformation of the old technology into a new technology that will benefit people and the future. So, exit mural, please. So Siqueiros is an extraordinary, innovative artist. And it has been often said that his fist divides the past and the future of Mexican art. There's so many things that young artists can learn from Siqueiros. And yet, sadly and unfortunately, Siqueiros is very little analyzed and discussed in art schools. And his political life is so controversial that too frequently his artistic merits have been ignored or diminished. He was born in Chihuahua, Santa Rosalia, the 29th of December of 1896. His mother, Teresa Siqueiros, and his father, Cipriano Alfaro. Unfortunately, his mother died when Siqueiros was only 3 years old. And so he was raised almost exclusively by his grandfather, Alfredo Alfaro. Now, to give you an idea of how this man must have been, may it suffice to give you his nickname. They called him El Siete Filos, the Seven Blades. He was a brutal man, though simultaneously a very sophisticated one. He had participated against the French occupation of Mexico. He had been Chinaco. He had also fought in the wars of Reforma. And he was a man that was comfortable in horseback and carrying weapons. He used to play hide and seek with Siqueiros at gunpoint. In other words, he used to say, "Hey, I see you there," and a bullet. "Get out of that," that kind of of mentality. Now, here you have an image of a very young Siqueiros at the center of the photograph. Now, at the same time that Siqueiros had this kind of quasi-militaristic, ultra-macho kind of education, he was very early fascinated by art. In those days, they distributed these little cards with reproductions of famous masterpieces. This is a copy of a Raphael piece. And in those days, the houses were elaborately decorated. And there was this house painter that did all these niches and painted all these little details. And he dressed in a very effective way, similar to what he thought a bohemian in France would look like. So he had these capes and these elaborate hats, very much a la Oscar Wilde kind of thing. And Siqueiros saw this guy, and he was so impressed that he too, must have been a very young kid, 8, 10 or something, and he started dressing the same way, putting his hats and his capes and copying drawings. In other words, very early, he associates painting with almost a theatrical representation that he would have all of his life. Harold, by the way, my dear friend who made that wonderful introduction, was telling me that he met Siqueiros. I was hoping he would say that much more than me. He was telling me how this guy was impressive and he had this personality about him. You know, it was not just that he was a great artist. He had a force about him. And he begins to develop this idea of himself and his persona and the impact that he would have on others very early on. Now, in those days, Mexico was governed with an iron fist by Porfirio Diaz, a man who was the dictator of Mexico for 30 years. And the father of Siqueiros, Cipriano, was an attorney that represented a lot of these hacendados, or owners of the land, that were a tiny population that controlled most of the properties and the land in Mexico. And it is said that one day Siqueiros, who was a teenager, was sitting in the table, and the Porfiristas, his father, was surrounded by all his clients, who started, to speak ill of the rebels. And it got to a point where Siqueiros couldn't take it anymore, and he rose and he said, "Solo sé que los hacendados son una bola de bandidos." He said, "I only know that the hacienda owners are a bunch of thieves." And he said that in front of the father, that was with all these friends of his that were hacendados, and so he got so angry that he grabbed a glass and threw it at Siqueiros. Siqueiros pulled the mantle off the table, and then he went out of the living room, he closed it, and then he destroyed everything in the house and left the house, never to return. He must have been 15 or 16 years old. And this revolutionary fervor had been taught to him by his sister, Luz, who was the only feminine influence in his life, and who later became a fervent Maderista, a supporter of Francisco I. Madero, the Democratic president who succeeds Diaz, and who would later be assassinated. So, if childhood is destiny, here you have, in a very young Siqueiros, all of the seeds that would later develop. The passion for art, the theatrical dimension to his personality, and the passion for revolution. And always the idea that one had to live the political beliefs that one professed. In other words, it was not enough to believe in the revolution if you didn't say it out loud, if you did not confront those who were against the revolution. In other words, the word and the action of Siqueiros were always united, were always together. And so after he fights with the father, after he leaves the room, after he attacks the hacendados, after he breaks everything at his path, there would be no reconciliation. Quite the opposite. There would be a deepening of his ideas and his radicalism. And even though he was not even an adult, he would join the armies of the revolution, General Villegas. And here, you see him surrounded by officers. Siqueiros would participate in battle. He would look at the struggle to transform the country. And the part of the army that he militates in is the faction that would emerge victorious of the revolution. So this young man, before 20, already has been a soldier, already is an artist, already has political ideas, and already has defined for himself the two paths that his life would follow: the path of art and the path of politics. And the faction of the military that he belongs to would occupy the city of Guadalajara. And here, in 1918, the great Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova would visit. And Siqueiros was mesmerized by her movement, and he would draw her. And these would be the first drawings of Siqueiros that would be published in a newspaper. Make a note of this, because Siqueiros' career begins and ends painting dancers, trying to capture movement. Now, because the new revolutionary government that is installed in Mexico appoints Siqueiros as a military attaché in Spain. And so, in transit to Spain, he first arrives to Paris. And in Paris, he would meet Diego Rivera. Diego Rivera had been living in Europe for about 14 years. And so this is one of the great encounters in Mexican art, because each had what the other was desperately pursuing. For Siqueiros, Diego Rivera represented the avant-garde, represented Paris, represented the contact with Picasso, and all the great artistic ferment and revolution that was occurring in Europe. For Diego Rivera, Siqueiros represented the Mexico he had left behind. And not only the Mexico that he had left behind, but the revolution that was occurring in Mexico while he painted in Paris. So it is said that they talked for hours and hours. And in typical fashion, Diego Rivera had his wife, Angelina Beloff, serve Siqueiros a plate of strawberries. 2 hours later, he brought him another plate of strawberries. 4 hours, another. 6 hours, another. And Siqueiros, that's the only thing he gave us, we ate them all. And Siqueiros, Diego told him, "Did you like the strawberries?" He said, "I love them, they're great." He said, "You know why? Because here we grow las cultivamos con caca." Probably a lie, but very typical of Diego. After his encounter with Rivera, Siqueiros travels to Spain And in Barcelona, he produces this manifesto, 3 callings for the art. And it is interesting because even though Siqueiros is in his early 20s, this manifesto already expresses some of the ideas that he would champion all of his life. The rejection of an art for the bourgeoisie, the pursuit of an art that is public and popular, the rejection of Art Nouveau and other bourgeois forms of art, the rediscovery of pre-Hispanic art. Many of these ideas are expressed publicly for the first time in this document. And like Rivera, Siqueiros would be invited to come back to Mexico and participate in this new movement that was being promoted by the new Secretary of Education of Mexico, José Vasconcelos. José Vasconcelos opens the public walls of Mexico for the artists. And he gives them these walls. The first murals are painted in what is now El Colegio de San Ildefonso, the school well, originally it was like the first, most important high school of Mexico. And it is interesting to observe how these first paintings are still very much influenced by the Renaissance. This is, for instance, the first painting that Orozco does. We're going to have a lecture on Orozco on August the 1st. This is, incredibly, this is the first mural Siqueiros does, of an angel. Who would ever believe it? So, they try different things to find Mexican art. You know, they form a union, the artists, and they talk among themselves. Someone suggests, well, why don't we try the pre-Hispanic techniques? Why do we incorporate the maguey juice into the painting? And that way, we will be connected with the Aztecs of the Mayans. So they try the thing, but it stinks, doesn't work. It's a disaster. No? Then somebody else comes with another idea. He says, why don't we, like our ancestors, try marijuana? We will inhale marijuana, and then we will connect with our mythic past. And we will really create Mexican art. It didn't work either because the scaffolding started to fall. However, what really did work was that many of the artists joined the Communist Party of Mexico, among them Siqueiros. And they started to get a political education. The change is very evident and very immediate. In that same building, Orozco would do this classic mural, La Trinchera. Diego Rivera would paint the unity of the workers and the peasants. And they would all form a newspaper that is called El Machete. When Vasconcelos left office, some of the opportunities were closed, but the artists continued to paint, mainly doing lithographs for El Machete. Because you see, the Mexican school has 2 great forms of expression. One is murals, and the other is the powerful graphic work. Now, Siqueiros, in addition of contributing to the newspaper, he felt the need not only to paint, but also to actively agitate politically. He joined the Union of Miners and other workers in Jalisco. And he must have been a galvanizing speaker because so powerful was when he told the workers to rise, to confront its oppressors. And so there was a worker, just to give you an idea of how powerful Siqueiros must have been. This worker, when he had his first son, and he called him sindicato, union. Then he had a daughter, tuvo una hija, y la llamó and he called her militantes. He called her huelga, strike. And then he had a third daughter, and he went to the judge and he says, I want to call her the theme of that last speech of Cameron Siqueiros. I want to call her militancia. Y le dice, oiga, ¿no será militancia? Está de word, ¿no? Dice, no, dice, I heard militancia. Says, who's the father, you or me? So that's what they called the girl. The Siqueiros would recall how many years later he saw this beautiful girl that came and said hello to him and said, hello, I am militancia Huiza. So Siqueiros was a powerful speaker, and he was eventually jailed in 1928. He was put in prison because of his political ideas. And being in jail in Mexico is no fun. And in those days it was probably a lot worse. They applied all kinds of techniques to the political prisoners, what they call los abandos, which sometimes they hang them, or some other times the political prisoners suddenly got depressed and all hanged themselves. Of course not. Or other things. Now, Siqueiros had this, from the very beginning, had this kind of unbeatable character. He could take the torture, he could take the punishments, he could resist whatever came his way. To such an extent that the authorities realized that it was useless to keep him in jail. That he was not going to name any names, that he was not going to break under pressure. And so instead of maintaining him in prison, they confined him to a city in Mexico that is called Tasco, where you have beautiful silver. And so for about a year or so, Siqueiros was able to live freely in Tasco. And there he did his series of first great works. The Museum of Santa Barbara did an exhibit with these paintings a few years ago. And here you have a couple of them. You see how Siqueiros is somehow reflecting on his past experiences. For example, this painting is called El Accidente en la Mina, the accident in the mine. And it is in Tasco where he meets famous people from Hollywood, Russian filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein, that we see in this image, and others, and they invite Siqueiros to come to Los Angeles. So he would do that. Here you see him with Angelica Arenal. We would marry her a few years later. In those days, he was married to Gachita Amador. And here, in the early 30s, he completes several very important murals. This one is called Mitin Obrero. And the mural is intact. It's covered, it's downtown, I see it. Very interesting. A second mural would be this one, Retrato de la Burguesía. This mural has been rescued and is now on permanent display in the Museum of Santa Barbara. You can see it anytime that you go there. It has very much the same colors that Siqueiros would use at the time. And the third great mural that he would do would be in Olvera Street. And this mural would be called América Tropical. The theme of the mural was Tropical America. And the sponsors expected Siqueiros to do something colorful. And this idea, that people have that Latin America is colorful. Stretch your hand and you grab a banana, and you hear the drums there, and some exotic dancer comes in there. You know, this kind of, and Siqueiros, you know, at first seemed to be complying with this idea because he does these very thick trees and drums. Though there were some guerrilleros sneaking around, but people were okay. But then, the last night, Siqueiros says, you know what, I want to give a final touch to it. And so, I want to do this alone. The day after, when the mural was unveiled, it produced a shock. Because what Siqueiros had painted at the middle was the figure of a crucified worker, crucified inward. Almost immediately, the mural was, but Siqueiros was accused of lying, that these things did not happen. But actually, the figure had been inspired by an actual lynching, and a photograph of that. And the mural was immediately attacked, whitewashed, practically destroyed. And it has remained that way for more than 60 years. It is the ghost of Los Angeles. But through many years of efforts and a very strange combination of institutions, this mural has been restored. The Getty Foundation has provided a lot of the funding, and there is a group that is with us this evening, the Amigos de Siqueiros, that I proudly, I'm part of. I love what they're doing. And the idea is that this mural will be completely restored by next year. It will never recover its original color, but it will be stabilized and it will be possible to view it. If you want to learn more about this, in the intermission, they have a table and you can ask about this work in progress to restore America Tropical. I really cannot be more enthusiastic about my support for bringing this mural back to life. So I hope that you drop by and check it out. And so, as you might imagine, Siqueiros was immediately deported from the U.S. And he could not return to Mexico either. So instead, he travels to Latin America. And it is almost like an adventure novel. Because literally, he's persecuted by one police after another. He's deported from one country, goes to another, is about to be imprisoned in one, goes back. He becomes the lover of Blanca Luz Brum, this beautiful Uruguayan poet that we see in this image. And so in this travels through Latin America, sometimes painting, always speaking, always connected to the activity of the places where he was part of. People still remember Siqueiros wherever he went. And in Argentina, he did another very interesting mural, the Ejercicio Plástico. Here we see some of these images in which he analyzes a body from many different perspectives. It is believed that this mural is also going to be restored, if not recently, very, very soon. So I really think that Siqueiros is becoming the muralist of the 21st century. You know, you're seeing a renewed interest in his work. He finally is able to return to Mexico, and here he challenges his colleagues to debates. With Orozco, he's speaking to him, and Orozco just walks away. And Orozco would say, whatever I have to say, I say, paint. However, with Diego Rivera, the debates are ferocious. They happen in Mexico's Palacio de Bellas Artes. At one point, pistols are drawn. And Siqueiros accuses Diego Rivera of doing art for tourists, of painting a colorful Mexico that has nothing to do with the real Mexico, and of doing so in an archaic technique. Rivera responds to him that the Mexico he paints is real, and he can see that anywhere he goes. And in the technical debate, we must say that it's probably time has given the reason to Diego, because Diego was very conservative in his fresco technique. Siqueiros was very experimental. But some of Siqueiros' murals, because they employ new materials, have proven very difficult to restore. People have no experience restoring some of the materials that Siqueiros uses in his works. Some of his paintings, for instance, have become very dark. They're almost becoming darker every day. So it's much more complicated than in the case of Rivera, who uses the very much the standards that have been used for hundreds of years before. Siqueiros, incredibly, is able to return to the U.S. now through the East Coast in New York. And in New York, in 1934, he founds the Siqueiros Experimental Workshop. And I would like to stress how important is Siqueiros in American art, though you will not find this in any of the art textbooks. But Siqueiros was a teacher of Jackson Pollock. All this drip painting is something that Siqueiros really invented. What Siqueiros calls it the controlled accident. That is, when you use acrylics and you drip, you put one color and then you drip on another, it produces a reaction that produces results that are impossible to determine or predetermine. So this is all of these ideas. He also becomes the teacher of a lot of artists that would later work in Marvel Comics, only that this idea of the super proletarian heroes that Siqueiros wanted to do would become Batman and Superman and things like that. Siqueiros also believed in doing art in billboards. He developed these techniques to do these big reproductions, and he thought in the future artists are going to come to a city and they're going to have 100 billboards of their work all over the city, and the art is going to be seen by millions. But again, the only ones that were paying attention were Madison Avenue. Here you have some examples of what I'm talking about. This is a painting that Siqueiros does. It's called El Nacimiento del Fascismo, the birth of fascism. And the painting is figurative, but if you look at the ocean and all the reactions and the colors, all of that could have never been achieved with traditional oil painting. It requires these new acrylics that give a completely different take, a completely different feel of the paintings. Here you have another example in this powerful work called The Echo of a Scream. Sometimes Siqueiros experiments with abstraction, but not many. Siqueiros was very interested in color and form, but he believed that art should be political, that art should say something, should mean something, should move people to action. It is said that one day he was invited by this avant-garde artist, the kind that believe in all these kind of strange things. And this guy had a studio, and he had it all covered with white canvases. And he had all these sponges with different colors, a red sponge, a blue sponge, a purple. And then the wife turned off the lights, and this guy threw the sponges into the canvases. And then they took them out, they framed them, and they sold them for a lot of money, and they called them, the paintings of his groins. And so he told, let's see, Siqueiros, why don't you try your hand at this? He took white canvases, they turned off the lights, and put the sponges of different colors. And Siqueiros goes at it ferociously. And so they turned the lights on and said, look, you're wasting your time being a figurative artist. Look how powerful this is, how different from anything that I did. How do you explain this? And Siqueiros said, well, you see, when I was a young man, I was a pitcher. And even though Siqueiros was doing well in New York, he was being very influential, he was developing a lot, the call of action came again. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War would break. And the Spanish Civil War is like the great prelude to World War II. It is a tragic conflict because Spain, the Republic of Spain, is betrayed by its own army, headed by Francisco Franco. And Franco solicits the aid of Adolf Hitler, of Mussolini, who send weapons and soldiers and arms to fortify the army that was attacking its own government. And in these years, the Western democracies were very concerned with appeasing Hitler. And so nobody wanted to interfere with Hitler. It is the time of not confronting the fascist aggression. And so England declares itself neutral. France adheres to the principle of non-intervention. The US does not intervene either. And meanwhile, Hitler sends the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, his Air Force to Spain. Mussolini sends his infantry. Here you see Franco receiving the fascist troops and weapons. People expected the Republic to be defeated in a matter of weeks. The disproportion of weapons and soldiers was seemed like a tragic conflagration. And yet, the people of Spain resist. The workers organize, the women learn to use rifles, and if the governments did not help the Republic, the people did. The US organizes what is called the Lincoln Brigades, which are formed by people like Paul Robeson and others. Hemingway participates, Orwell participates. In Mexico, you have artists and many militants, soldiers. All of them form the international brigades that are going to confront fascism in Spain. And Siqueiros is one of the few who has actually been a soldier. And so he joins the Republic and obtains even a military rank in the army of the Republic. And incredibly, the Republic resists several years. More than 1 million people die in the war. And the siege of Madrid is one of the most heroic moments of the 20th century. And yet the Germans send, for the first time, planes to bomb civil populations. Every time that I see an airplane bombing civil populations, I remember it is an invention of Hitler. This is why it's so shameful when we do that to other countries. This idea of bombing the civil population of a country to demoralize it. In World War I, the bombing or the airplane battles happened in the battlefield. But this idea of sending airplanes to the cities. And the Germans also use what they call the Stuka bombers. That are these airplanes that fall in vertical fall with sirens. And just when they're arriving, they drop their bombs. So in addition of the destruction that the bombs produce, the airplanes generate a psychological terror. Cities like Guernica that inspired Picasso's masterpiece are literally wiped out through the German bombs. And eventually the Republic is defeated. Millions are exiled. Others cross the Pyrenees into France. orphans are sent to Mexico and other nations. And Siqueiros takes the defeat very hard. In his mind, the reason of the defeat was not just the superiority of the fascist weapons, but the divisions of the left. Because the left at the time was divided between the Stalinists, who were in the Soviet Union, and those who followed Trotsky, that had been deported from the Soviet Union. These are some of the paintings that Siqueiros would do at the time. This one is called Postrado pero no vencido, lowered but not defeated. This one is called El Sollozo, the cry. And it is in this state of mind when Siqueiros does this mural in the Union of Electricians of Mexico, El Retrato de la Burguesía. This is his first masterpiece. Intramural, please. And here you see everything that he had lived in Spain. I wish I had a laser pointer. Don't follow me, because if you follow me, the light will defeat the mural. So here, in this part, you see the demagogue. That is like the presentation of Hitler, this paraclete. And you see the destruction of democracy. And then you see here the civilian defense against the chemical weapon. And then in the middle, you see the money, the great business that is every war. Every war is a way of certain people to make millions and millions of dollars. And Siqueiros would paint that in this powerful mural that he would complete in 1939. Exit mural, please. And it is also in this moment when Siqueiros would commit the worst mistake of his life. In many ways, Siqueiros would never recover from this mistake. And I will talk to you more about it after the intermission. Oh, and certainly, check los tequilas que tenemos, all of these wonderful people that you see here. Les pido un aplauso para todos ellos. Thank you so much. Can you all see? Maybe you put light on them, so that I don't want anybody falling. I want to make sure that if you see anybody falling, grab him or her. You might even get lucky. Thank you so much. Light everybody. I want to make sure that everybody is safe. Todo mundo. There's also another person that I would like to recognize. My dear friend, Jeanette Reynolds. She used to work in Epson, and she was instrumental in getting all the equipment donated to MOLA at the time. So, Jeanette, without you, we wouldn't have this program. Also, in attendance is Guillermo Verde, one of the great artists that is exhibited at MOLA. He lent me a pointer, so gracias. So, by the way, I would like to commend the museum. It has, in my view, the best exhibits. Even though I'm not the director, but these exhibits are better than anything I could come up with. That Guayasamín show, fantastic. I commend Richard Townsend and all this wonderful team for the great work that they're doing. Check out the MOLA, it's just fabulous. So, thank you all. And I would just like to remind you that next week we're going to do the second lecture, which is a lecture that I haven't done in a long time here at MOLA on Frida Kahlo. And it is, I don't want to call it a new lecture, but it has a lot of new things on it because we recently celebrated her bicentennial. And so many things have been rediscovered on Frida. Among them, they finally opened her wardrobe that had been closed for 50 years. And I find it very interesting because you look at the clothes and then you look at the paintings, and there's a lot of connections there. So there's a lot of things. There's all these batteries of psychological tests that were made on her that have been published. There's a whole very long interview on Frida. There's many new little films. So I've incorporated all of these materials in this lecture on Frida. But I suggest that you get your tickets early because we think we're going to run out of parking lot space. And then we're going to close with Orozco. But anyway, let's continue, please. Also, I want to thank Lily Lamas, Carla, and all my wonderful volunteers that are with us. Por favor. Gracias. All the volunteers that are participating, Susan, all the docents. So I was telling you that after the defeat of the Republic in Spain, Siqueiros is disappointed and is bitter. And he believes that the left's weakness occurs because of its division. Now, I must also add that Siqueiros was a member of the hard line of the Communist Party, very, very Stalinist. And Stalin, who had occupied the power in the Soviet Union after the death of Lenin, had basically persecuted a lot of the old Bolsheviks and imprisoned them. And in the case of Leon Trotsky, who had been the founder of the Red Army, he was deported. And eventually Trotsky was granted asylum in Mexico through the intervention of Diego Rivera. And so Siqueiros was furious at this idea that Mexico was giving asylum to the arch enemy of Stalin, of Trotsky. And it is impossible to justify, it's difficult to understand that a man of his prominence, his importance, would decide to personally assassinate another man. But that is what happened. Siqueiros formed a group with his closest associates and brothers-in-law, and he created a unit armed with machine guns, and he personally tried to assassinate Trotsky. They arrived to his home at night, and they threw round after round of ammunition. Miraculously, they did not kill Trotsky because Trotsky and his wife went under the bed. And so all of the bullets that Siqueiros and his colleagues were aiming at him went above. If you look at that image, you see the bed, and then at this altitude were the bullets. And Siqueiros fled and was in hiding in Jalisco, where he had once been un líder obrero. And eventually he was discovered and he was arrested, and he was taken to Mexico City. And once in the prison, they took him out of the prison. And Siqueiros felt that they were going to kill him. In those days, there was a way of killing political dissidents that was called La Ley Fuga, which was, they gave them supposedly the opportunity to flee. And then they killed him, and they said he tried to escape. So Siqueiros was convinced they were going to kill him or torture him, something like this. And they took him out of the prison, put him into a car, all covered. And then, to his amazement, he found himself in the house of the president of Mexico. And this fat guy comes to him. He says, ¿Qué? ¿Ya no te acuerdas de mí? You don't remember me? President. Siqueiros doesn't remember me. It turns out that the current president of Mexico, Ávila Camacho, had been a fat cadet. The fat president, no? Lord, que es gordito siempre. And so, during those days, nobody wanted him in his tent. But Siqueiros took pity on him and allowed him to share his tent. And so Ávila Camacho had never forgotten it. And so now he wanted to repay the favor. And so instead of imprisoning Siqueiros, he allowed him to exile. I'm allergic, not the swine flu. And through the help of Pablo Neruda, Siqueiros obtained a visa for Chile. In Chile, in Chillán, he did a famous mural, Muerte al Invasor. Lincoln Kirstein, my opinion, the U.S. great art promoter, the founder of the New York City Ballet, was so impressed by this mural of Siqueiros that he considered it the greatest work since Leonardo da Vinci's. So everything moved. And after this, Siqueiros reemerges. In 1950, he wins the second prize in the Venice Biennale with works that become classics of Mexican art. I'd say universal art. This is one of my favorite Siqueiros pieces. It's called Nuestra Imagen Actual. I give a lot of lectures in high schools. This is why I'm wearing my Support the Dream Act button. The muchachos there. And this work is one of them that produces the greatest resonance wherever I go. A lot of the kids tell me that, life sometimes is so hard that you develop like a face of a stone just to be able to cope with reality. It's a classic Siqueiros. Look at the strength of the painting, the perspective, the use of foreshortening, how the hands seem to extend to you, and the power of the image. We would also do this work, which is a lynching. This one that is called El Diablo en la Iglesia, the devil in the church. Now, Siqueiros, you notice that most of the time, you use perspective to create the illusion of depth, right? You look at a flat painting, but through perspective, that flat surface appears to have profundity, right? Now, you can do the opposite, and you can create the illusion that the painting is coming at you, or coming out, what they call foreshortening, or escorzo. This was perfected by artists such as Uccello from the Renaissance. And Siqueiros is fascinated by these ideas, and he studies them. And so he does these works that seem to come out of the painting. This was very influential among his students, especially all those who later went to do superheroes. If you look at those Superman images, they all seem to pop out of. And also, he creates movement. I'll do something here, of the light. Could you light the people? Light everybody, so they don't fall. For example, if you look at this, not all of them, but if you could stand up, some of you, maybe, and walk on one side, and then walk on the other, and look at the paintings and see what happens. But be careful with the purses, huh? All right. You're probably going to have to just trust me on this one. Maybe of the front row, some people in the front row. A ver. Front row. A ver, váyanse para allá, go over there, and then come. A ver. And then come the other side. I mean, as long as you don't trip. You see? What happens? It moves. You see the knees? And it turns. This is the same technique that you see in some churches, that you look at these saints that come and turn. And Siqueiros uses it in magnificent ways. Some of his murals literally appear to be flying. When you come into these murals, like the one in the Hospital La Raza that I'm going to share with you, it produces the sensation of being in a dynamic environment in which nothing is static. I have never seen anything quite like it. Are you all seated now? No? I'm not sure. ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo se vio? ¿Verdad? Oh, that chair was perfect for that. ¿Qué tal? What did you think? Júntense conmigo y verán. So he's always studying these things. It's like, how do you change a space through painting? How do you create movement? This is a mural that he does in El Hospital La Raza in Mexico City. And the whole mural, the roof is integrated with the walls. Enter mural, por favor. I'm just showing you a small reality. I was thinking that my voice was carried. Don't worry about it. They see Siqueiros, me. No matter. If I were to do justice to this, I would have to create like a whole concave thing the size of you. So you see, you look at it, and this worker seems to come towards you. This figure of Prometheus is in the middle of the ceiling. So literally, you feel it flying at you. The workers, here come the sky, everything moves. It is truly amazing. Exit mural, you must see this mural. Next, it really has an enormous power. Here you see the figure of Prometheus that is descending as you watch it. Siqueiros was also fascinated by the idea of photography. Here you see him with his good friend Orson Welles. And he uses a lot of photography to create his paintings. Sometimes he becomes his own model, or he uses, this is his wife, Angelica. And you see, he sees, well, how can I create this environment? What does it look like? Here you see himself posing, and then the painting. or falling, and sometimes the paintings really become like dances. Like in this case, in this mural that he does in the University of Mexico in 1952, he tries to fuse sculpture and painting. So it has volume. Enter mural, please. So the motion of the students is captured in this mural, and you can see this miles away. And it changes as you drive past it. Exit mural, please. This is a photograph of my dear friend Luis Garza. I don't know if he's here, but I do know that his photographs are here. The Museum of MOLA has a limited edition of these prints, so if any of you wants to acquire this photograph, you can here at the extension. Another time when he tries to use this technique of fusing sculpture and painting is in this other mural, enter please, called Speed, Velocidad, in which you see a person running. Siqueiros intended this to be the logo of a car. It would have been fabulous, but who would accept the logo of a communist for a car? However, now this mural has been restored and it is in Mexico's foreign ministry. But it really gives you the impression of a runner. And not only of the way that a runner looks, but how you feel when you run. Don't you think? Extraordinary. Exit mural, please. Siqueiros was also a wonderful portrait maker. And I'm going to share with you some of his portraits. This is of Union leader Lombardo Toledano. This is of José Clemente Orozco. Here you have a society lady, Carlos Chavez. And this is my favorite. This one is of George Gershwin. And it is the portrait that he worked hardest at, because Gershwin first asked him for a portrait, then he said, well, I want it with my piano. Then I want to be in Carnegie Hall, and then I want to be my mother in the state, I want my friends, and this and the other. And then he said, I'm still unhappy. There's something missing. And he says, what is missing? He says, you are missing, Siqueiros, but there are no more seats. And so he painted Siqueiros up in the stage. And he was at the height of his powers, and he was doing a mural in El Castillo de Chapultepec, Castle of Chapultepec, where Maximilian had lived. And this is a mural called From the Porfiriate Regime to the Revolution. And it's a tribute to he creates more walls to do this mural. Again, if you ever go to Mexico City, visit this mural. It's fantastic. Because it really gives you the sensation of being part of the motion. Enter mural, please. For example, here, you see the funeral of a worker. But all of these images are created with perspective. And so as you walk by, they move, they twirl around you, and you have the body of the worker. So it has this feeling, you feel part of that rally. At another scene, it has Porfirio Diaz and all his society, and he's surrounded by dancers. And as you walk past these, they also give you the sensation of integrating you into the movement of the mural. Next mural, please. Here you have that twirling motion of the dancers. So he was working in this mural, but he was also active in politics. He was denouncing the president of Mexico, and he was imprisoned. At the time, there was this in Mexico in the 50s, 60s, I mean, you could do anything, but you could not mess with the figure of a president. That was out of limits. There was even this famous joke about, the Mexican and the American, and the American says, "US is a free country. I can go right there in front of the White House and say, 'Down with Barack Obama,' and nothing happens." And the Mexican says, "The same in Mexico. I can go right into the presidential manager's balcony, right down, and I say, 'Down with Barack Obama,' and nothing happens." But Siqueiros actually not only denounced the sitting Mexican president, but he did so internationally. And so when he returned to Mexico and was doing his mural, they applied on him un crimen, un delito, que se llamaba disolución social. I'm not making this up. The crime was called social dissolution. The good thing that President Bush did not learn too much about Mexican history. Social dissolvement. You were accused of dissolving a society, can you imagine? And so, thank you so much. And so that is what Siqueiros in his 60s, world famous, was placed in one of the roughest jails of Mexico, the Black Palace of Lecumberri. He was in a tiny cell. Some people believe that the cancer that he developed occurred because he was in this tiny cell with all these acrylic paintings, breathing them in a very close contact. And you would imagine, that a man of his stature placed in these conditions would get very depressed, right? But no, Siqueiros started to organize the prisoners. He organized a play called Licenciado No Me Olvides, Lawyer Don't Forget Me, Attorney. And he designed the scenery and had the other inmates participate with it. Also from prison, he sent the most beautiful flowers to his wife, Angelica. The flowers of Siqueiros have nothing to do with this kind of mannered idea that we have of flower painting. His are like little explosions. They're absolutely beautiful. And Siqueiros used to say that one of the privileges of being an artist is that you can give flowers without cutting them. Siqueiros was in prison for more than 4 years, and there were protests all over the world demanding his freedom. Eventually, he was released in the mid-60s, and he went from a tiny prison cell to world celebrity. He was received by Nasser. Here you see a very young Indira Gandhi with Angelica and Siqueiros. Here you see him with all the different statesmen. And then in the 60s, in the late 60s, he would do his most ambitious mural, the Poliforum Cultural Siqueiros, perhaps the largest mural in the world. Here he would elaborate all of the ideas that he had worked over a lifetime. Also in his old age, Siqueiros would have a grandson, and he would paint him. You know, all these beautiful paintings of man with child. Most of the time you have women with child. He would do this painting of Christ that would be part of the Vatican's collection. And interestingly, in the back of this painting, he says, only those who believe in Christ have the right to paint it. And always movement, dancers. Among the last works of Siqueiros were images of dancers. We can say that Siqueiros began and finalized his career painting dancers and trying to capture in a perpetual moment the essential movement of life. Enter me. Siqueiros would develop cancer, and nobody told him how sick he was. And when he was taken to the hospital, his wife had to cover his face so he would not see his own mural. Because in this hospital, he had done a mural about the future victory of science over cancer. And his wife did not want him to realize that they were taking him defeated by the sickness that he hoped that science had overcome. Execute. Siqueiros would die the 6th of January of 1974. His last words were, "Me falta tiempo." I need more time. And the last mural that I would like to share with you is the mural in Los Angeles that we're trying to restore. Enter murals. This is America Tropical. A mural that I believe is now more timely than ever. And as I share this mural, this ghost that has existed in our city for so long, I say our city, I should have said our county. But what I mean is that this is an integral part of California. It is a mural that has inspired Chicano art, has inspired pop art, has been with us for so long to get covered. And it is this mural that will be born again very soon. And while sharing this mural, I would like to quote a courageous journalist of the LA Times who wrote before Siqueiros was deported. He said, "The artist Siqueiros, whom the federal authorities seem so anxious to deport, is without a doubt a dangerous type. Dangerous for the spectators and retailers of life and art. For when the young confront this gigantic dynamo that pounds in the night under the rain, or clamors boldly when the brilliant sun of midday shines in the plaza, they will possibly find inspiration to rise in rebellion in future revolutions in art and life, exclaiming, 'Here comes the future.'" Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you next Saturday.